University is doing studies on survivors of the Holocaust. The next two generations of the Holocaust show on their biometric data points that they suffered a severe trauma, even though the children and the grandchildren of survivors of the Holocaust were not alive. So there's unconscious signals. It's almost like their body entered into the world with a coding.
Welcome back to the Low Bottom High Rise podcast with me, your host, Moira Kucaba, and you're in for a treat today. We have my friend Mike Zeller in the house. Mike, thank you so much for being on the show today.
Excited to be here, Moira, and can't wait to dive in.
Yes, I'm thrilled to have this conversation, and I'm just so thrilled to be able to share it with my audience. You have been in places like Forbes, Business Insider, Huffington Post. You've been all over in the media. And, you know, I love that your website is so just bold and to the point. It says Mike Zeller builds companies. You've built a lot of companies. You've done a lot of things. And I know a lot about what you do from a personal kind of experience we've had in these last few weeks. But from your perspective, Mike, what would you say you do in the world professionally?
A couple of different things. I mean, I sat down with the founder of Social Media Examiner a couple weeks ago, and he's like, Mike, have you ever considered you're neurodivergent? And I was like, no. And he's like, well, you have so many different interests that, so I, on a deep personal level, I love to work with high performers on rewiring their nervous system. And I think I have a unique skill set that combines NLP, peak performance psychology, a deep understanding of human psychology and trauma-informed, plus the use of plant medicines or MDMA when necessary or when desired. But I use other modalities like neurofeedback and other things to help rewire nervous systems as well. So that's my deep passion. Is I think I'm one of the best in the world at helping people, high performers, rewire their nervous system to get unstuck from trauma, PTSD, and shine at their highest and fullest, access that higher alter ego. But then on the other end, I have a marketing brain, I have an entrepreneurship brain, and I like to build business ventures that go beyond my efforts and my time. So I've got a few different ventures in those types of arenas too.
And this is exactly why when I found you, I was like, kind of seems like the male version of me, like the business side, the entrepreneurial side, the ability and the capability and really the experience in building lots of businesses, which requires a lot of business acumen, right? But then there's our heart and our passion, and it's kind of on that, just the more inside journey stuff.
Yeah.
So I vibe with you so well. I understand your brain. When you say nervous system, that's like your everyday language. You probably throw that word out 100 times a day. Yeah. I think there's probably a large part of the audience that is sitting there thinking like, whoa, wait, what does that mean, right? Because I teach a lot of NLP, and I talk a lot about the neuroscience and actually kind of rewiring our brain. Yeah. And you're talking about this a little bit differently. You're talking about rewiring your nervous system. And even for me, and so closely aligned in the work that we do, I'm like, oh, that's different. Tell me what you mean by that exactly.
My specific processes, I consider like doing deep neuro rewiring, and really it came to me, was thrust upon me. I was deep into mindset and peak performance, but then when my wife got pregnant with our daughter, it began a basically almost 3-year battle with depression and PTSD and complex PTSD and panic attacks 3 or 4 or 5 times a week. And I was like, the mindset stuff wasn't working and my NLP wasn't working. I was like, oh crap, something else is happening here. And it's like her nervous system was just stuck, and unconsciously our daughter, especially once she was born, would trigger my wife into overwhelm and despair and depression by crying or by the threat of crying even. And I was like, okay, there's something else happening here. And so I had to go deep into trauma. I'd be reading trauma books at the middle of the night as my wife and daughter were sleeping and trying to figure it out, because I was like, my wife's an amazing human and I didn't want her to not be on earth. And she did not want to be on earth anymore, and didn't want to be a mom, didn't want to be a wife during those moments, just because life was too painful for her. So I had to realize, okay, there's something else happening here, and it goes so much deeper than our mindset or our thoughts. And in fact, I would argue that our nervous system informs our thoughts even more than our thoughts inform our nervous system. They both play a role,
Right.
and they can influence one another. But another thing I learned recently is that your heart communicates to your brain 6 times more information than your brain communicates to your heart.
Wow.
So,
Wow. Like, can we just take a moment there? That is powerful.
yeah, so if your brain, like we've been thinking, oh, it's your brain sending signals to everything. Well, not exactly. The rest of your body's sending signals. And then you think of the epigenetic side. Like Duke University is doing studies on survivors of the Holocaust, and the next 2 generations of the Holocaust show on their biometric data points that they suffered a severe trauma, even though the children and the grandchildren of survivors of the Holocaust were not alive during that. So there's unconscious signals. So it wasn't, quote, their brain saying, it was their nervous system. It's almost like their body entered into the world with a coding and a program of like, this is what's going to happen, right? This is how you're going to respond. And you're going to be more susceptible to this disease, or you're going to be more afraid of this or whatever. As I've done the work with my wife, fortunately, she's essentially completely cured of depression, 95% cured of her complex PTSD. Panic attacks are gone. We know how to manage all that stuff now and avoid it. And if one of them gets activated, boom, we know what would take us days, we can do in 20 minutes to recalibrate, right? And even we had an incident last night with her abuser, which is in fact her mom. She has a narcissistic, abusive mom, showed up at our door at our house at 10:30 p.m. last night. Rang the doorbell. He's not invited. We aren't supposed to see her. Anyway. So we had an incident where we had to recalibrate my wife's nervous system and all that jazz. And I was, calm and collected overall through the whole thing. But I think what I didn't understand for years, but what I'm now studying like crazy, like just reading books nonstop, listening to podcasts, is if we can rewire our nervous system to like that next level of performance, that next level of love, that next level of heart connection, that next level of joy. Like I have access to levels of emotional joy that I couldn't have imagined touching 2 years ago. Yeah. And it's because that heart and body and mind connection is there, and I couldn't get it. All the therapy wasn't getting me there. It was frankly, it was medicine, partly the medicines that helped me. And anyway, so I'll pause because I keep going sometimes.
Because there's so much here. I'm like, it's blowing my mind. There's so many things. So I want to dig even deeper on literally like the definition and how you would define nervous system, right? So that's number one. Number two, epigenetics. I've played with it, studied with it, gone down that rabbit hole since it kind of came on the scene, maybe for me, for the general public, maybe 20 years ago. Fascinating, which I think we want to define that a little bit. But you just kind of broke through something for me even. I've heard generational trauma, and I'm such a spiritual person, but at the same time, I'm such a science person, I'm very much both ends of the spectrum. And when I hear generational trauma being passed down, like even I kind of scoff it off as like, all right, whoa, like we don't have to get that woo, like we don't have to go with the way you said it. It makes so much sense. The way that we pass down genetics, right? The way that we pass down blue eyes, green eyes, color hair, height. You're talking about this trauma. Of course, it imprinted right in their physiology.
Yeah.
So how could that not be passed down?
Right.
Like, whoa.
There's this book, The Field, and it talks about research that they've done, and this is kind of mind blowing and sounds wild. But they did an experiment on 700 salamanders. Okay. And what they would do with these salamanders is they would take their brains out. Okay, this is legitimate, like scientific research in journals. Take their brains out, slice them, dice them, grind them up like ground beef, right? Put them back in the salamanders. And as long as the brains were still there, meaning the physical matter was still there, no matter if they sliced and diced or ground them up or whatever, the salamanders would go back to functioning. Literally go back to eating and operating essentially normally. And so what they've have found, and what they can actually measure in some advanced tools, is almost the salamanders had the brains had an energetic holographic imprint. And the hologram actually stores so much more data and memory. So when you think of some of the quantum realm,
Right.
the holographic energy, and even like we know, and there's a Heart Math Institute, they're using conventional ECGs and EEGs and things like that. But the ECGs, they measure your heart's radiance. And when you're in a state what they call heart coherence, which I have a video on my YouTube about that, but in the state called heart coherence, your heart radiates an energetic or magnetic field that can be measured scientifically up to 8 feet. Versus if you're in a state of fear or doubt, right? Then your heart is like radiating inches.
Yeah.
Versus this magnetic. Like when you step on stage and you're just on fire and you're delivering your talks and you're charismatic and powerful and high energy, guess what? Your heart is like extending out into the audience and they can feel it.
Yeah.